This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jill Newbronner, and here are tonight's top stories from East Asia. Strong protests from Japan, as Russian President Vladimir Putin makes a first visit to the Far East Kuril Islands. Tokyo also lays claim to the area as the Northern Territories. World leaders pay tribute to former Chinese Premier and economic reformer Zhu Rongji, who died yesterday at 97. Taiwan at a brief standstill as internet speeds are slowed and people moved indoors during the last phase of the island's annual Han Kuang military drills. Lenovo shares surge after the world's biggest PC maker delivers a forecast-beating quarter, powered by an AI hardware boom. China is going all in on matcha, turning the green tea powder into a new engine for local economies. From high-tech factories to matcha noodles, can China reshape the global matcha market? Japan has strongly protested Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to the disputed Kuril Islands, with Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi calling the move unacceptable. It marks the first time the Russian leader has travelled to the island that is also claimed by Japan. Mr. Putin travelled to Iturup, as it is known in Russia, after visiting nearby Paramushir, where he oversaw Russian naval drills. A footage released by the Kremlin showed him touring a fish processing plant, a hospital and a school. Japan has voiced firm opposition to the visit, saying that the Northern Territories, including Iturup, are Japan's inherent territory.
北方領土は歴史的にも国際法上も我が国固有の領土であります。ロシアの現職の大統領による今般の択捉島訪問は、北方領土に関する日本の一貫した立場と相入れません。また、日本国民の感情を傷つけるものであり、断じて許容できません。
The territorial row centers on 4 islands seized by Soviet forces in the closing days of World War II in 1945. Japan calls them the Northern Territories. Russia administers them as part of the Southern Kurils, and the dispute has prevented the countries from signing a formal post-war peace treaty. Decades of talks have failed to resolve the matter. Russia ended peace negotiations with Japan in 2022, and that was after Tokyo imposed sanctions over the war in Ukraine. Dasha Chernyshova is tracking all these developments for us. She joins us live from Moscow. Dasha, is there a significance to the timing of the visit? Russian leader visiting the Kurils now. Why?
Well, indeed, the Russian president's visiting the Kuril Islands for the first time since he has become the president of Russia, and obviously it is a demonstration of Russia's sovereignty over those territories, and also an indication that Russia has no intention to reopen the negotiations over the ownership over those territories. We also understand that this is a very important moment where the Russian president has just been overseeing the military drills, the final stages of the military drills taking place of the Russian Pacific Fleet in that part of the country. Also a very important show of force that Russia still holds in that waters and in that part of the country. So from the Russian perspective, it is an important moment, but also we understand that this is taking place just a couple of weeks ahead of the anniversary of Japan's surrender, official surrender in World War II. So the Russian president has just been recently saying that Japan has to recognize the realities and the outcomes of World War II. It is important to move forward. He has also been saying that Russia has no issues with Japan, while Tokyo has issues with Moscow. So from the Russian perspective, the ownership of those territories is absolutely clear, and Russia is saying that Japan has to abandon the so-called remilitarization efforts.
We have precedent for this in the form of then-President Dmitry Medvedev, who visited in 2010. Now, he was the first Russian leader to visit that disputed territory. Remind us, what was the fallout back then?
Well, indeed, Dmitry Medvedev, when he was president, he has traveled to the island of Kunashir. That was back in 2010. And then actually later, he also visited the territories as the prime minister of the country. That was in 2012, 2015, and then 2019. In 2021, Mikhail Mishustin, another prime minister of the country, has also made a trip to the island. So in 2010, what we have seen was the very strong reaction from Tokyo, where the authorities of Japan have been saying that move was absolutely deeply regretful. They were also summoning the Russian ambassador, giving their note of protest to the Russian side. And actually, there have been also some protests coming from the Japanese side every time the prime ministers have been traveling to this territory. But the Russian foreign ministry was very clear back then, suggesting that the officials of Russia, the president of Russia, is absolutely free to make his own decisions on which part of the country to travel to. So Russia is saying that was yet another trip by the president of the country across the territories that Russia holds control of. So definitely what we are seeing now is the repetition of that sort of scenario where Japan is exercising its right to protest, and Russia suggests that it can do whatever it can on the territories that it considers as its own.
Yeah, Dasha, let me just read you some news that's just come into us just this past minute. We've been told that Japan's foreign minister is summoning the Russian ambassador to strongly protest against President Putin's visit to the Kuril Islands. Given that and all that's already happened, what does this visit tell us about where Japan-Russia relations are heading?
Well, when we look back at 2010 and that first visit by Dmitry Medvedev to the territories that are claimed by Japan, we definitely see that the level of the relationship was much higher back then. The economic ties were maintained. The also sides were talking about the signing of the peace treaty. The situation is drastically different now. We are indeed understanding that Russia has no intention to reopen the conversation about the ownership of those territories. We also understand that these territories have been the key obstacle in signing the peace treaty between the two countries. So what we can say now that the breakthrough in these negotiations is very unlikely to be coming in the coming time in the foreseeable future. And we understand that Japan will be indeed protesting the moves that we have just seen, as you have just read. So obviously it is not increasing the level of the diplomatic ties between the two countries, but we do also understand that Russia is trying to send a very strong message that this is the Russian territory and it will strongly stand to protect the territories which Russia claims as its own, be it in the Far East or closer to Europe.
All right, many thanks. Dasha Chernyshova reporting for CNN Live from Moscow. Tributes are pouring in for former Chinese Premier Zhu Rongji, who died yesterday at 97. He is remembered as a key reformer who helped transform China into the economic powerhouse it is today. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim called Mr. Zhu a good friend and one of the great architects of China's economic transformation. Hong Kong's leader also expressed his sorrow, thanking Mr. Zhu for his long-standing support for the city, particularly during the Asian financial crisis. Japan's embassy in China posted an image of the Japanese flag flying at half-mast. Now, Mr. Zhu leaves behind a formidable economic legacy. From 1987 to 1991, he held key posts in Shanghai, including as mayor, helping lay the groundwork for the city's emergence as a global financial hub. As vice premier, he took on a central role in managing China's economy. Mr. Zhu pushed through some of his toughest reforms after the Asian financial crisis, overhauling state-owned enterprises and launching housing reforms that helped kickstart China's home ownership boom. Then came his defining achievement in 2001 to help steer China into the World Trade Organization, opening the door to much deeper integration with the global economy. He retired from politics 2 years later in 2003. Well, let's get more. We have CNA's Tan Se-hui joining us from Beijing and Crystal Chia. She is based in Shanghai. So, if I could start with you, as the news starts to sink in, what has reaction been like, both from the public but also officially?
Well, we're standing outside the elite Tsinghua University. That's where he had graduated and where he had been a founding dean of the School of Economics and Management. He had served as the head for 17 years. Now, Tsinghua University hasn't issued an official commemorative post, but it had reposted the official obituary, which I have here in my hand right now. It is on the front page of newspapers here in China. This is Renmin Ribao. It is the People's Daily. It is a joint obituary including the Chinese Communist Party Standing Committee as well as the National People's Congress Standing Committee. Now, the language being used here in the obituary was high-ranking in the language and the tone. It had described Mr. Chu as an outstanding member of the party, an exceptional leader, and a major loss to the party and the country. It also credited Mr. Chu for playing a major role in shaping modern China's economy, having reformed state-owned enterprises and having played a major part in China's entry into the World Trade Organization. Across social media, although it has been a 24-hour period, it has still been trending. His passing has still been trending on Weibo. It is the top trending post and topic in Weibo. Many posts, 1 million posts, an outpouring of grief. They had called him the people's great premier, and many of them had also posted photos. Back in the day, warm photos of Mr. Chu and former President Jiang Zemin working closely together. And his passing comes just as on Monday, China commemorating former President Jiang Zemin's centenary and issuing a full commemorative honors to him on Monday. But as of now, we do not know the funeral arrangements for Mr. Zhu Rongji or which leaders will be in attendance or whether there are orders for a flying of a half-mast.
All right, let's cross now to Shanghai, a place very special to Zhu Rongji. He spent 4 years there in Shanghai, including as mayor. Crystal, as we reflect back, how significant were those years and what are people saying about Chu's legacy?
Shanghai today is lined with skyscrapers, global banks, and iconic landmarks, but it was a very different picture in 1980. In the 1980s, Shanghai had run-down infrastructure, its companies were very inefficient, and in fact, it was slower than other Chinese cities in terms of its development. Then in the late 1980s to the early 1990s, Mr. Zhu, together with Mr. Deng Xiaoping, they started to have long discussions setting out a vision for Shanghai. Mr. Deng had famously told Mr. Zhu that the 1990s was Shanghai's last chance to be developed. And so Mr. Zhu got to work. His projects included Suzhou River, which is right behind me, the expansion of Hongqiao Airport and Metro Line 1. In the financial sector, he oversaw the establishment of the Shanghai Stock Exchange. And in China's factories, he brought German specialists all the way to Shanghai to train local workers. Now, as Se-hui said, since last night, my social media feed on WeChat was flooded with commemorative posts. People are reposting some of his more notable sayings and explaining how his teachings are still applicable even today. Now, earlier today, I was on the streets of Shanghai speaking to a few Shanghai residents about Mr. Zhu's passing, and this is what they said.
改革派嘛，但是改革的话会触动很多人的利益啊，也比较艰难，因为国家太大嘛，改动起来，它会有一个很漫长的过程，不是说1届2届都能完成的一个长期的变革的过程，所以有这个勇气去改变的话，本身就是很值得称道的。
因为 我上海人，所以说我会对朱镕基总理有一种莫名的一种亲切感。在我小时候的时候，其实也会看新闻嘛，跟家里人一起看新闻。在我看新闻的时候，其实也会了解到朱镕基总理对于上海的一些贡献。因为对于我来说，可能上海目前的一些非常繁荣的景象，或者说是目前上海的繁荣程度，都和朱镕基总理的之前为上海做出的贡献有关。
Now, apart from those two people, I've also spoken to quite a few others, including a 17-year-old. And what's becoming quite clear is that despite these people being from different age groups and having different levels of familiarity with Mr. Zhu and his work, Mr. Zhu's reputation among the people is that he is someone who dares to make a change, who is not afraid of speaking out, and that he is someone who has made significant contributions to China and its economy. Jill?
All right, and that was Crystal Chia reporting live to us from Shanghai, and you also heard Tan Tse-hui from Beijing. Thank you, ladies. Now, Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong has sent his condolences to China following the death of former Premier Zhu Rongji. In his letter, Mr. Wong said Mr. Zhu demonstrated foresight and resolve in advancing China's economic reforms. And Mr. Wong also described Mr. Zhu as an old friend of Singapore and said that relations between both countries made significant progress under Mr. Zhu's leadership. He added that Mr. Zhu was also an early supporter of Singapore's first government-to-government project. Coming up on East Asia tonight, China's AI boom crowns a new corporate heavyweight. Memory chip maker CXMT overtakes Tencent as the world's most valuable Chinese company. Plus, Starbucks Korea sinks into its first ever quarterly loss as a marketing backlash sparks a boycott and draws criticism from the country's president. Welcome back to East Asia tonight. We're going to go straight to Roland Lim. He has the business news for us, Roland, including Lenovo's report cards out.
Yep, it does seem that Lenovo's PC to AI infrastructure pivot paying off. AI-related revenues now accounts for 35% of total group revenue. And that's helped the Chinese tech firm deliver market-beating quarterly earnings, as it also benefits from a global memory chip shortage. Revenue rose 43% on year to nearly $27 billion in the 3 months ended June. That's its fastest quarterly growth in 5 years, beating market expectations of $22.3 billion. Now, adjusted net profit, that surged 176% to over $1 billion, also comfortably ahead of forecasts. Lenovo shares hit a record high ahead of the results, taking year-to-date gains to above 250%. They closed up for the day 20% higher, $34.80. This after surging as much as 22%. The world's largest PC maker is increasingly being seen as both an AI infrastructure and AI device player as it expands beyond computers. Now, AI-related revenues jumped some 60% to $9.3 billion, accounting for 35% of first-quarter revenue in its fiscal first quarter. Its Intelligent Devices group, which includes personal computers, smartphones, and tablets, posted 27% revenue growth despite surging memory costs. And that came even as global PC shipments fell 5% in the April to June period. Lenovo has also raised PC prices to offset soaring memory costs. The AI boom also reshaping China's corporate pecking order. Chip maker CXMT has overtaken Tencent to be the world's most valuable Chinese company, underscoring demand for memory chip stocks. The crossover reflects investors' continued preference for AI-linked hardware over traditional internet champions. Now, CXMT is the world's fourth biggest producer of dynamic random access memory, or DRAM, which is essential in everything from smartphones to advanced AI servers. It has become a proxy trade for China's AI ambitions and semiconductor self-sufficiency push. CXMT debuted in Shanghai last month and quickly became China's largest onshore listed company. Now, its shares closed down around 1.2% today, valuing the company at $524 billion. That's still enough, though, to overtake Tencent, whose market value has fallen to $510 billion. Tencent shares are down more than 26% this year. Now, China's Yangtze Memory Technologies has broken into the world's top 3 NAND flash memory suppliers by volume for the first time. Counterpoint Research says YMTC captured 14% of global shipments in the second quarter, narrowly overtaking Japan's Kioxia. Samsung remains the market leader with 25%, followed by SK Hynix at 22%. YMTC is now targeting the higher margin data center storage market as booming artificial intelligence demand reshapes the global memory chip industry. Hong Kong conglomerate CK Hutchison's first half profit jumping sharply, helped by higher oil production amid the global energy shock and hefty gains from recent asset disposals. Now, net income surged to $3.4 billion from just $109 million a year earlier. Revenue rose 6% to about $32.6 billion. The group benefited from its stake in Canadian oil producer Cenovus Energy as the Iran war disrupted global supplies and boosted demand for alternatives. Its health and beauty retail business also saw resilient demand across Europe and in Asia. South Korea's Starbucks swung to an operating loss in the second quarter after sales fell following a controversy over a marketing campaign. Operator SCK Company posted an operating loss of $13.4 million, reversing from a $29 million profit a year earlier. Remember, in May, Starbucks apologized and halted a Tumblr campaign. It was criticized for evoking the bloody 1980 Gwangju pro-democracy uprising. It also suspended its usual summer promotion in June. Parent company E-Mart did not directly link the quarterly decline to the controversy or subsequent boycott calls. Bank of Korea is buying gold again for the first time in 13 years. A U.S. filing shows that the Bank of Korea held nearly 680,000 shares in the world's largest gold ETF at the end of the second quarter. That's worth about $250 million. Now, it held none 3 months before. It's a significant shift in its position. The central bank hasn't added to its bullion reserve since buying 20 tons back in 2013. Physical reserves are now flat at 104.4 tons, estimated to be worth some $4.8 billion, or just 1.1% of its foreign reserves. Officials say it'll now start buying gold from domestic refiners and working with the Korea Exchange and Producer, LSMNM. The move comes as central banks globally rethink the role of gold. Now, China has accelerated its own purchases in July, adding to reserves for a fifth straight month. The World Gold Council says that central banks bought a record 289 tons of gold last quarter, even as prices fell. Now, geopolitical uncertainty and concerns over currencies and government debt continue to drive demand. Now, gold itself has rebounded to around $4,400 an ounce. That's near a 2-month high, but it remains about 21% below its January record of nearly $5,600. And that is your business update at this hour. Jill.
All right, Roland, many thanks for that. Coming up on East Asia tonight, the typhoon season, if you've been watching our shows in Northwest Pacific, shaping up to be one of the most intense on record as the El Nino phenomenon strengthens. We'll be speaking with an analyst to unravel the severity of the system as well as what it spells for the region. You're with East Asia tonight. Here are the headlines we're following. Japan's Prime Minister slams Russian President Vladimir Putin's first visit to the disputed Kuril Islands, describing it as unacceptable. Tokyo also laying claim to the areas as the Northern Territories, Japan summoning the Russian envoy to lodge a strong protest. World leaders paid tribute to former Chinese Premier Zhu Rongji, who died yesterday at 97. He's remembered as a key reformer who helped transform China into the economic powerhouse it is today. And civilian drills bring Taiwan's capital to a brief standstill as the internet slows and the streets clear in the last phase of the annual Han Kuang exercise. Air raid sirens sounded across Taiwan's capital today as the island steps up preparations for a potential attack. You see there police clearing the streets as people were ordered to stay indoors during the drill, while buses and cars directed to air defense shelters. Authorities also slowing mobile internet access for 30 minutes, simulating possible disruption during an aerial attack. The exercise comes as Taiwan nears the end of its 10-day-long annual Han Kuang War Games. Last night, Taiwan's military rehearsed blocking enemy forces from crossing a key bridge into Taipei. The drill included simulated combat and featured Taiwan's locally developed Clouded Leopard armored vehicles. Out at sea, the Navy staged its first anti-blockade drill with the Coast Guard yesterday, practicing how to escort a merchant vessel safely to port. Now, Taiwan has long been concerned that China could try to blockade the island during a conflict. Beijing considers Taiwan part of its territory, a claim that the island's government rejects. North Korea again staying silent over its latest ballistic missile launch. It's the second time in a week that Pyongyang has broken with its usual practice of reporting such tests. Now, South Korea's military says the missile was fired yesterday from the eastern coastal city of Wonsan and flew more than 700 kilometers. Pyongyang also made no announcement about a missile launched from that same area last week. And North Korea has previously kept quiet about launches it considers minor. The latest tests come ahead of the annual Freedom Shield military exercises. That's between South Korea and the US, which Pyongyang has long condemned as rehearsals for an invasion. Meanwhile, more than 40 countries, including Japan, South Korea and the US, are calling on all countries to give advance notice of at least 24 hours for long-range ballistic missile and space launches. Now, they warn that insufficient notification just increases the risk of miscalculation and threatens regional security. Well, the typhoon season in the Northwest Pacific Ocean shaping up to be one of the most intense on record as El Nino weather phenomenon strengthens. Forecasters say typhoon development could reach 60% above the historical average, calling it an exceptionally active season. Now, storms have been sweeping all across the region this week. Typhoon Dolphin brought extreme rainfall deep into China after making landfall on the east coast, while Chanhong brought heavy rain and strong winds to Japan. Analysts say Dolphin's deluge was driven by three key factors, namely its vast cloud system, an unusually long lifespan carrying huge amounts of moisture inland, and terrain that forced moisture-laden air upwards, intensifying rainfall. Now, August is typically peak typhoon season, but a strong El Nino is making this year unusually active. 20 typhoons are forecast to form, including 13 intense storms potentially affecting China, Japan, the Philippines, and also Vietnam. So let's understand this a little bit more. And we're joined by Benjamin Horton. He is the Dean of the School of Energy and Environment at the City University of Hong Kong. Mr. Horton, welcome to you. Now, we're seeing unusually dangerous Northwest Pacific seasons. Help us understand the science behind it. I call them the terrible twins. That's El Nino as much as climate warning. You have a much more better description from it. You call it the perfect storm. Explain.
Well, for a typhoon to form, you need warm ocean temperatures. That's simply the fuel that causes a storm to form into the most destructive of extreme events. How do the oceans warm? Well, you need to think about what season you're in. And we're now in typhoon season, where in the northern hemisphere, we get very warm ocean waters in the months of July and August and September. We also are in an El Nino, and perhaps the most strong El Nino on record, that also further warms our ocean. And then we finally have climate change. So when you add those three together, you are in a hurricane season, you have El Nino, you have climate change, you have the warmest temperatures. And right now, our temperatures in the Pacific are the warmest they have ever been. So it's not surprising that you get a frequency and intensity of typhoons that you're seeing today.
Yeah, how worried are you about what you just said, being the most intense so far? And also, would you go as far as to say that El Nino might actually be changing where these typhoons form and where they go?
Well, I think the scientific community have been worried for several decades now about the impacts of typhoons. If you put greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, you warm up your atmospheres and oceans. And one of the effects that we have documented in many scientific papers and reports is that the intensity of these typhoons are going to increase. That means that when a typhoon forms, it has more energy because it has record-breaking ocean temperatures. So it's more likely to be a category 4 and 5 than a 1, 2, or 3. To answer your other question, other things about these typhoons are changing. They have a more northward track. So the east coast of China in more northerly latitudes are being hit by typhoons. Areas of Japan that were formerly safe from typhoons are now being hit. The third aspect is that they occur longer in the season. You say that there are peaks in August. We're going to get significant typhoons September, October, all the way through to November.
Yeah, understand. What about the fact that these typhoons are actually traveling longer than before? Dolphin, for example, traveled 6,000 kilometers before hitting China. It's such a long-lived storm, isn't it?
Well, again, I'll just repeat, it's because the oceans are warm. If the oceans aren't warm, they don't have the energy and they dissipate. They have very, very warm waters. We're monitoring this. They're called marine heat waves. We monitor very warm waters very close to the shore. So another thing that we observe with these typhoons is that they intensify really rapidly. So offshore, they may be a category 1 or 2. And then within a short few hours, they intensify. And that's a significant hazard, but because it doesn't give you the warning necessary to evacuate people at such short notice.
So even as it builds up quickly, even when it weakens, the damage is not over because then comes the flooding threat, for example. Why can a weakening typhoon still be so dangerous that far inland?
Well, that's part of some of the complexities in the communication of typhoon hazards. The categories of typhoon are based upon wind speed. So a category 3, 4, and 5 have wind speeds in excess of hundreds of kilometers per hour, but it doesn't account for the amount of rainfall. So some of the complexities is once a typhoon makes landfall, they may reduce in wind speed. But again, because of climate change, the atmosphere holds more water vapor. It doesn't account for the increasing volumes of rainfall that land in an area. So Typhoon Dolphin, Shanghai received a third of its annual rainfall in 24 hours. I mean, that is such a horrific total to be deposited on a low-lying city that is also subject to sea level rise and subsidence.
So with these changing trends, are our warning systems keeping up?
Well, I think we have to say that one of the success stories is our adaptation to these most extreme events. If we go back several decades, hundreds of thousands of lives could be lost with a typhoon, a very infamous one in Bangladesh, Typhoon Bowler. Estimated 300,000 to 500,000 people tragically lost their lives. If you switch it through to the 21st century in some of our most developed regions, I'm based here in Hong Kong, because of the success of the Hong Kong Observatory and the Hong Kong government, that when Typhoon Ragasa made landfall last year, the amount of lives lost was 0. So we've made significant progress in the adaptation to protect, particularly in developed nations. On the flip side of that is the amount of economic damages. In the 1970s, damages were in the order of tens of millions of dollars. Now we're looking at damages in millions of dollars. It was estimated that in the decade from 2010 to 2020, the cost of typhoons was $1.4 trillion from these disasters.
Mr. Horton, a final question. The season is far from over. We've still got to October to get through. Talk to us about which parts of Asia should we be watching for next? Who's most at risk, and how is this season going to play out?
Well, I think what we need to think about is that these typhoons, they're going to be more intense than we're used to. They're going to have this rapid intensification with little warning sign. When they make landfall, maybe the wind speed will drop, but huge amounts of rainfall will be caused. They will combine to cause excessive coastal flooding because of sea level rise. They will last longer into the season, and they will have a more northerly track. So the areas that are commonly impacted, the Philippines, for example, but now we need to look at low-lying areas such as Shanghai, moving up further along the eastern seaboard of China, and obviously looking further into Japan and Korea. In a simple answer, the whole of Asia is impacted this year, because if we go back to the start of this is an unprecedented El Nino, and this is an unprecedented climate change. And you call it the terrible twins, I'll call it the perfect storm. We just need to continue communicate that the season isn't over with, and the worst could be yet to come.
We appreciate the explanation. We appreciate the Asia-wide heads up. Thank you, Benjamin Horton, Dean of the School of Energy and Environment at the City University of Hong Kong. Extreme weather becoming a growing threat to food security. The United Nations says frequent and prolonged heat waves are damaging crops, livestock, fisheries and forests. CNA's Julie Yu with more.
A report by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization warns that extreme heat can act as a risk multiplier, worsening droughts, pest outbreaks, and reducing crop yields. For most major crops, yields begin to decline when temperatures rise above about 30 degrees Celsius. And for consumers, that could mean higher food prices. Extreme heat can also reduce oxygen levels in the oceans, putting fish stocks under greater stress. And El Nino can amplify some of these pressures by pushing sea surface temperatures even higher. Experts are now watching for the possibility of a so-called super El Nino. Southeast Asia is on alert. A stronger El Nino could bring higher temperatures and prolonged heat waves while raising the risk of forest and peatland fires across the region. And that could threaten the production of key commodities, including rice and palm oil. Experts say Thailand faces risks to agriculture and water reservoirs, as well as greater strain from extreme heat and rising power demand. In the Philippines, reduced rainfall could put further pressure on farms, water supplies, and hydropower. In Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Myanmar could see impacts on fisheries, while Indonesia and Malaysia face a greater risk of fires and haze. And Singapore, too, could feel the effects from transboundary haze and potentially higher food import costs. The governments across the region already preparing. Water pumps are being distributed, irrigation infrastructure is being expanded, and emergency reserves are being planned. Farmers say they're adapting by turning more drought-resistant crops and hardier livestock. But the UN says adaptation can only go so far, and that the only sustainable long-term solution is to tackle the root cause, which is climate change.
Still to come in East Asia tonight, China is betting big on matcha and looking to put its own stamp on the global craze. Welcome back. Japan's historic Kumamoto Castle has reopened to visitors just over 2 weeks after a magnitude 7.1 earthquake struck the southwestern prefecture. The castle had been closed since then as authorities carried out safety checks. Inspections found earthquake damage at dozens of locations around the castle, including uneven flooring and collapsed stone walls. But officials say the damage does not pose a safety risk. Visitors returned to the nationally designated historic site today, where they were welcomed with a traditional performance. Kumamoto Castle was already undergoing restoration works following powerful earthquakes in 2016. Those works are expected to continue until 2052. Meanwhile, more than 30,000 buildings in Kumamoto remain without running water after major pipelines were damaged. The United States forces Japan has airlifted about 16 tons of drinking water to the prefecture. And we have so much more coverage of the earthquake that rattled Japan late last month. For that, you can log on to our website, cna.asia, or even our mobile app for commentaries, such as this one on how extreme heat can turn one disaster into two. China, the world's biggest producer of matcha, is looking to use the powdered green tea to boost local economies. It's investing in homegrown technology while cultivating an appetite for matcha at home. CNA's Tan Se-hui reports from Guizhou province, and that's a major matcha hub in China.
China wants to become a global matcha powerhouse and reclaim what it says is a Chinese tradition. This factory in Tongren City, in the southwestern province of Guizhou, supplies matcha processing equipment to producers across the country.
好，老师可以介绍一下你们的设备吗？
好的，这个设备呢叫给叶机，它的作用是从我们的茶农在山上把茶青、茶叶、鲜叶
倒进去这边的，
投入里面，然后均匀的输送我们的加工设备，就是我们生产碾茶、抹茶的前端。 第一个设备。
Once processed, these tencha leaves are ready to be ground into matcha powder. The machines here cost about 40% less than imported equipment, making it easier for tea-growing regions not traditionally known for matcha to enter the industry. The company has set its sights on the overseas market, but for now, its biggest customers are at home.
那么今年呢，整个订单已经排到了12月份。 整个生产量呢是完全无法满足国内设备的需求的。
China isn't just producing more matcha. This country of 1.4 billion people is cultivating a taste for matcha. Across Guizhou province, the streets are taking on a shade of green. Businesses are putting matcha on the menu, including this noodle shop. Zhang Jun quit his job and poured 6 million yuan, or about $886,000 US, into this restaurant.
因为它起源于我们中国的唐宋时期嘛，现在呢，这个抹茶呢又回到了我们中国。然后后来有了这个抹茶以后呢，我就说尝试一下变革。
Customers couldn't stomach the noodles when he first set up shop, describing them as bitter and rough. But after 2 years perfecting the recipe, the noodles have become a local attraction, drawing even foreign tourists for a taste.
Matcha soya bean, matcha noodles, matcha mantou, and matcha dumplings. I've been saving my stomach for this, so let's taste the noodles first. It doesn't have a very strong matcha taste. It actually tastes quite normally like what I usually eat.
Mr. Zhang says matcha has become a new driver for the local economy at Jiangkou County in Tongren City. Reports state that the county's matcha industry generated more than 130 million yuan, or $19 million US, in total output value in the first quarter of this year. China is on track to produce nearly 70% of the world's matcha this year, with output expected to reach 18,000 tons, up from about 12,000 tons last year, according to the China Tea Marketing Association. As China scales up production and builds demand at home, those in the industry believe it could transform the global matcha market. Tan Sihui, CNA, Tongren, China.
Finally tonight, day turned into night for many parts of Europe as it was treated to a rare total solar eclipse. Spain and Iceland had the vantage view to see the phenomenon in its totality. The moon moved swiftly in between the Earth and the Sun. The totality phase lasted just a little more than 2 minutes, but it was enough to mesmerize many. And there was applause in Spain as this was an extremely rare occasion. The last time it saw a total solar eclipse was more than a century ago, back in 1905. Crowds were left in awe.
Ha sido mi primera, no sé si mi última vez, pero una experiencia sobrecogedora.
La sensación es impresionante y solo se entiende si lo vives en directo. Es que estoy llorando todavía. He llorado, no tengo ni idea de por qué he llorado y sigo llorando ahora. No sé por qué.
Some very lucky spectators had a close-up look at the eclipse. Iberia Airline flew a special flight taking about 100 people more than 10,000 meters high into the sky with no clouds to block their view. They included a group of scientists studying the sun's corona and how humans perceive the eclipse from the air instead of from the ground.
Lo que se ve es que es único, o sea, y más desde aquí, desde un avión, la altura, el ambiente, el silencio, o sea, no es lo mismo, entiendo yo, que verlo desde la calle con unas gafas o no, diferente.
For Iceland, it's considered a once-in-a-lifetime spectacle. The last total eclipse, a solar eclipse that is, was in 1954, 72 years ago. This time, during the totality phase, reports said animals became quiet. Birds returned to their roost.
It was sort of surreal, and it was strange. It's like from another planet or something.
I felt goosebumps because it just makes us think about, I don't know, the shortness of life and how time can be different.
Well, Spain will be in a vantage position again in the next total solar eclipse, expected in a year's time, when it will also cross northern Africa, Saudi Arabia and Yemen. The Asia-Pacific gets its chance as well to be awed when several eclipses will cross huge areas of the region. And you can mark the 22nd of July 2028 for a total solar eclipse for Australia and New Zealand. And in 2035, a spectacle expected to cover much of Asia, including China and Japan. And that is it for Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. But please check out your headlines anytime at cna.asia or look for us on Facebook and YouTube. Bye-bye.